Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining this webinar. It's the Diversity Project Returners Workstream, and we're cooperating here with the Return Hub. My name's Rachel Harris, and the reason that I'm in front of you right now is because I'm the chair of the Returners Workstream. I'm also a returner myself, so any of you that I've spoken to before will know that I have got a massive soapbox that I like to stand on and talk about anything and everything to do with returners. I don't really want to talk about me today. I have got a much more eloquent speaker who's going to come along later and talk about her experiences of having been a returner. But I did just want to give you a tiny insight into what we've done as a work stream so far. We've been very much focusing on returner programs, and we're into our second year of the cross-industry returners program that will actually be launching with real live returners on the 4th of May. So we're in the process right now of advertising and interviewing and recruiting returners. And we have 8 participant firms across the investment and savings industry. That's up from 5 participant firms last year. We did this last year, we did it all virtually, so we know we can do it again. But what we really wanted to do today was we wanted to broaden that conversation beyond the idea that the only way you can get returners in through the door is through this sort of programmatic approach. How do you find the talent? And also, more importantly, what is a returner? So Dominique Moss, I'm delighted to introduce Dominique. She's the founder of the Return Hub. And the Return Hub have built a reputation as a leading firm placing women in the city. Their candidates are highly skilled professionals who are mainly, but not exclusively, women who've taken a career break or been on a different career path for a while. They focus on candidates at mid-senior level financial services roles. And with Dominique today is Lee George, who's MD at Reddington. Now, the Return Hub placed Lee as a returner into Reddington in 2017, and she's now on the exec board, and she'll share her story later, but it is really a fantastic success story. So that's me done. Thank you very much for joining, and over to Dominique.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and thanks very much to the Diversity Project. Thank you all for attending. It's good to see so many of you here. Just by way of quick introduction, I've been a headhunter in the city for 20 years. I spent most of my career at Sheffield Haworth. Many of you may know that firm. I ran the fixed income practice there. And then I set the Return Hub up in 2016, really to fill what had become clear to me was a huge gap in the recruitment and search industry at that sort of mid and senior level, working with employers who want to reach a much more diverse talent pool than the ones they would find through traditional recruiting methods, but also candidates, mainly women, who were excluded from those traditional recruitment methods because they'd taken a career break or done something different for a while. We are a small team of 5. We now have over 50 clients in the financial services sector, and they range from FTSE 100 companies and household names like HSBC, like ICG, across both the buy side and the sell side, but family offices and startups and fintechs as well. What I would say is we're not just a recruitment business. We've also developed a suite of digital tools to support all of our candidates on their career journey. And we regularly champion in the media returners. We talk often on the topic of diversity, particularly with regard to gender. So I'm just going to go through the objectives for today's session. But before I do that, we're going to run a quick poll. I last week attended the Diversity Project panel discussing the urgent need to focus on women in the industry during the pandemic. And they carried out a survey then asking whether COVID was seen as a threat or in fact an opportunity for the progress of women. And we thought it'd be really interesting to do the same poll with this audience. Okay, that's interesting. I think everyone's voted. So, okay, so we can see that 32% think it's a threat, but the majority of you, 68%, think it's an opportunity. So this is the third time I've heard about this, seen this poll run. The first time the poll was run back in March last year, and the audience then, about 70%, I think it was, just over 70%, also thought that COVID was going to present an opportunity to the progress of women in the financial sector. Although last week on the panel, and I think the audience was a much larger audience than this one, but interestingly, 55% felt that it presented more of a threat. So a stark contrast to the one at the beginning of last year, and obviously the one that we've just done. But I think, however things play out, there is a definite urgent need to double down on diversity And given the circumstances we're in and the impact that COVID and the pandemic has had on women's careers, we are in danger of slipping back. And I think it's really important that we use all the tools all the weapons in our arsenal to address this issue. So we've been working in the returner space since 2016. We've learned an awful lot since then about what works and what doesn't. Both myself and my team have got at least 20 years experience either in search or in the financial markets themselves. So very well understand this industry. I learned very quickly that the talent pool is huge. It's perhaps a lot bigger than you might think. And it is a candidate pool that is missing from traditional processes because they've taken time out and done something different. But also those candidates that are not being catered for by a returnship, but still are excluded from traditional search. So our core focus is really putting them back onto the radar into more business as usual roles. And we have thousands of brilliant candidates who either simply didn't fit or didn't want or need a returnship. And I think equally there are companies as well that haven't felt that a returnship was the right model for them for all sorts of different reasons. Or perhaps it's working very well and they do that, but they want to do more and they understand that it caters for a very specific group of people who've taken time out. And in any event, that's where we really, really come in. So let's just think about the objectives for today's session. So we're going to gain insight into the current recruitment landscape. We're going to understand how traditional recruitment practices can create potential roadblocks and learn how to avoid them. We're going to learn how firms of various sizes are harnessing overlooked talent by incorporating returners into their talent acquisition strategies, and hear a case study from Lee on successful strategies in returning to work. And then obviously, as Rachel said, we'll participate in a roundtable discussion with your peers. So let's begin by talking about this sort of the recruitment landscape. And obviously we are going through absolutely extraordinary times. The pandemic has had a huge influence on the recruitment landscape in using that overused word in an unprecedented way. So let's start by reviewing the current recruitment market and what we're seeing. So this time last year, we were really expecting a boom in economic activity. We'd just come through the general election. The Tories had won a decisive victory. We were looking to have a 5-year stable majority government. Brexit had been decided. And I think a lot of us felt, certainly in the beginning of the year, that there was a renewed confidence for business. And little did we all know that within a matter of weeks, things would be turned on their heads. And of course, that has had a huge impact on recruitment levels. So around sort of beginning of lockdown, March, April, May, June, recruitment was down about 80% up and down the country at all levels in various different industries. I would say things did start to pick up July, August and September. And I think that's because companies had got used to onboarding candidates remotely, new joiners who'd signed their contracts before lockdown and had to be onboarded remotely. And of course, interview processes were carrying on virtually. And, I've no doubt that we will see the virtual interview. Well, the virtual interview will be with us for I think forever. And actually, we have seen a pickup at the start of this year with really encouraging levels of activity. And we do expect that to carry on. So we carried out a survey, our last survey just before COVID struck. We do a big piece of research every year. And in that survey, ironically, more than a quarter of respondents said that they had wanted to see business leaders invest in better technology to enable flexible working. And of course, since then, obviously, remote onboarding, virtual interviewing have become the norm. But I think technology will evolve hugely to make this a much better and more effective experience. Although obviously we still do see many problems and challenges, I do think it has the potential to create huge efficiencies in this process and will continue post-COVID. This is just a slide just to show that women over the age of 30 have been hardest hit by the hiring slowdown. More women than men we know are leaving because of the burdens, on the pressures on professional women in the home, obviously, and men as well. But we know that it is falling disproportionately on all working parents, but particularly on mothers. So we do expect there to be more and more returners over the coming months, and as they then as things return back to more like normal, and they will look to kind of relaunch careers. At the beginning of the pandemic, I think we were extremely concerned about diversity and the initiatives and the time and money that's been spent on addressing this issue. And we're really worried that that might be jettisoned as companies really were just focusing on survival and all the operational challenges of getting huge numbers of their workforce working from home. But actually what we're really seeing is firms really doubling down on diversity and being even more committed to increasing diversity in their senior teams. I was listening to Helena Morrissey on the radio recently, and she said that she made a great comment that that what has made companies successful in the past is not necessarily what is going to make them successful in the future. And I think it is absolutely imperative that to be successful in the future, companies need to have a variety of voices at the decision-making table to inform those decisions in that direction. And obviously one of the biggest challenges that we often hear from businesses is that they can't get women on shortlists, and they just find it very difficult to get them to see CVs, to get them through the interview process, and to get them on the shortlist. It is one of the biggest issues, but there is a massive opportunity to tap into this incredibly valuable female talent pool. So let's just talk about the barriers to entry, if you like, some of the internal blockers that we see that are in place for this particular candidate pool. In another recent survey, over half of our respondents cited a reluctance from employers to hire someone with a CV gap as the main barrier preventing women from returning to work. And just under half say that the lack of clear paths back via traditional recruiting channels is one of the main barriers to returning. So let's just unpick what we mean by that. What are the traditional recruiting channels? So if we boil it down to executive search first, obviously, let's take an example. A company A needs to hire a new head of sales. You speak to a headhunter, you identify who the 10 target companies might be that you want to look at, and the shortlist is made up of individuals who are doing that current job at those competitors. So that again doesn't take into account those who perhaps used to do that job, but have fallen off the radar and gone and done something else. So those who've got a gap on their CV, entrepreneurs, women raising a family, or individuals in a role but doing something slightly different. It's a very linear process. And then if we look at recruitment agencies at the more volume end, that is very much a cost per hire and a time per hire. It's driven by those two things. And very often 2 or 3 or 4 firms are asked to work on a role, and they all know that the company that finds the square peg candidate in the shortest time frame will most likely win the fee. So again, that sort of non-standard candidate just finds it very difficult to cut through. And then you have jobs boards. Obviously, most jobs, even mid and senior level jobs now, you can see advertised online. They receive hundreds and hundreds of applications, and they need to be whittled down into a number that's manageable by a human being. And those algorithms that do that will, again, very often filter out those non-standard candidates, those candidates that have a gap on their CV or have done something slightly different. So you can see through traditional recruitment methods, they're fantastic at what they do in many cases, but they do exclude a significant and really valuable piece of the available talent pool. So returnships and return to work programs are fantastic at engendering a cultural change in an organization and evolving the debate around this topic. But there is much more that can be done. And many of our candidates are looking for a job and don't necessarily meet the criteria for a returnship program. In our 2019 research report, we also gathered feedback from HR directors who found the programs useful for mid-level hires, less effective for attracting senior level hires. I think the senior level hires, the senior candidates are much harder to fit into, in general, a return to work or returnship program. But others found the structure was difficult to scale in a cost-effective way. And we know that there have been some challenges that some firms, not all, but some firms have found finding permanent roles at the end of a returnship for some companies quite tricky. The other thing I would say is that due to the timing of the programme, you inevitably narrow down the potential candidate population as they have to be available to start at a specific time of year that matches the programme. And that's obviously versus a pool of candidates who are not necessarily going to stay on the radar forever, as the good ones do get snapped up. So how do we define returners? So for us, we tend to cast the net very broadly, and we really do think of returners as those that are excluded for all sorts of different reasons from a traditional recruitment method. And also, whilst not for perhaps the purposes of this particular session, we also have candidates who are looking to transition or pivot from their current role, which means that they perhaps you wouldn't think of them as returners, but they just happen to be excluded because as I say, they're looking to do a career transition or career pivot, and traditional exec search is not really set up to help them do that. We also found that we had some candidates who we found would not, they were applying for a return to work programme, but because they'd been in a role, albeit not in financial services during their break, or perhaps they had they'd taken on some kind of paid work, they were not, they were not eligible for a programme. But also we know that candidates deselect themselves as they feel like they don't fit the criteria for whatever reason. What we also know is that very often we hear that employers try to decide if a role is right for a returner based on some myths about who returners are. So we often hear employers or hiring managers say, we've got this role, but I'm not sure it's right for a returner. And I'm just going to give you a little example of somebody in my network, actually a male returner who just returned to work as the president for EMEA of Wells Fargo. And he actually took 3 years out running a farm and doing something totally unrelated to financial services, and has now come back into obviously an extremely senior role running a very large business over there. So we mustn't think about what role is suitable for returners, but think that potentially any role is suitable for a returner. I did just want to make a comment here about the fund managers, because I appreciate that the Diversity Project is doing some work around seeing how possible it is for fund managers to move on, to move back following a break, obviously given the challenges around gaps in a track record. So it'd be interesting to see, to see what happens there. So this is just a slide. This is just a slide to show the widespread of skills and sector experience within our own candidate population. We, as I say, take a very broad brush, but you can see that they have a very relevant skill set for an organisation in the financial services sector, and really, should really be put back on the radar as part of a comprehensive and inclusive recruitment strategy, as we say, potentially for any role. Also, what I would say is this data, this slide is a snapshot of data at a particular time, because obviously our candidate pool is fluid in that we have lots of candidates coming in every month, new ones, and other ones who are going out as they go into roles. But it broadly gives you hopefully a good idea of the kind of candidates who are out there and not catered for, as I say, by traditional recruitment methods in the main. So we as a business have 3,000, actually just over 3,000 now candidates on our books. And they come from all these different areas of financial services. So you can see banking, investment management, insurance, private equity, consulting, accounting, and the law. Perhaps one interesting thing that I found very interesting when we launched the business and we started to see the candidates register, and we capture a lot of data when they register with us, so we know a lot about them at any one time. But it's pretty much stayed the same. It's about 73% tick the full-time box when they register. So perhaps busting one of those myths that returners are all mothers wanting to they're all women, they're all mothers, and they want to work part-time. That's certainly not the case with the majority of our candidates who are really, really looking to relaunch a career. And here perhaps we can see just a good example of just a visual representation of what we think the size of that missing candidate pool is from a much broader recruitment strategy. So I'm now going to introduce Lee. Lee is going to outline her experience as a returner, and hopefully you'll enjoy hearing her story. I'm going to leave it to Lee to introduce herself, and I'm going to put myself on mute. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Dominique. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about something I think is so important and one that has had such a huge impact on my own career. I'm really fortunate to be in the position to be able to speak about returning to work after a break from the perspective of someone who's taken breaks and come back on returnship programs, both formal and informal, as well as a hiring manager who's both run returnship programs as well as directly hired returners. My personal journey in and out of the workforce was brought on by the arrival of each of my 3 children and 2 global relocations due to my husband's career. So I've taken 3 career breaks in total so far, who knows, which varied in length from 1 to 4 years. So one of my returns, as I mentioned, was via sort of just general networking, as you would normally do, and 2 were via formal returnship programs, the most recent of which was here at Redington, where I was placed by Domini and the Return Hub in 2017. So since joining Redington, I've run 1 returnship program and then moved us, after lots of discussion with Domini and some of the other folks at the Return Hub, to a more direct hire model. And I'll spend a little bit of time with the benefits of each of those as I see them kind of towards the end of my comments. I thought I'd start by sharing my views on sort of the benefits of hiring returners into an organization, just from my own personal experience of doing so and participating. So obviously, as Domini has said, this is a massive pool of untapped talent, many of whom are overlooked, due to those gaps in their CVs, or for whom there isn't that obvious inroad back into the industry. I myself, found that I was constantly coming up against the having to explain the gaps and the assumption that I was, sitting at home eating bonbons and painting my nails during those gaps as opposed to doing anything productive. So just the quality of the candidates that I've come across in our recruitment efforts, as well as my fellow returnship candidates, fellow returnship participants, both at Credit Suisse, where I did my first one, and at Redington, the quality has just been extraordinary. These individuals have brought kind of an enormous wealth of knowledge from both their years in paid and unpaid work. So really want to drive home the point that the overall experience of these candidates, and in my own experience, kind of the things that I was doing when I wasn't in paid work, it's so important for us to move away from this kind of traditional construct of there being a CV gap. And I'm sure you all know this from your own networks, that unpaid work frequently draws on a whole host of skills, including, organizational, people and stakeholder management, project management, financial planning, and builds, these gaps I've found in myself and others have built, adaptability, resilience, grit, and, goodness knows that's always a handy thing to have in an employee, as we've all found out over the last year of working remotely. So as soon as we start seeing these career gaps as a positive, or at a minimum, not a negative, I think we'll all be able to open up our recruitment pools to a host of candidates we've not been including in the past. So I think you'll be able to then gain an experienced hire, sometimes with exactly the skill set you're looking for, that square peg, square hole that Domini referred to. But I think the real kind of magic happens when you are able to think a little bit more creatively about how someone with an adjacent skill set might be able to contribute to a role or your organization overall. I'm definitely a little biased here because I've returned to work and pivoted my career every time I've come back. And I think it's one of the most amazing benefits of returning to work after a break. It was a huge opportunity for me to do something a little different that I don't think I'd ever have been considered for if I'd just kind of continued on my linear trajectory. I started my career back in New York in wealth management and private banking, and returned to work in Hong Kong the first time for a consulting company covering the financial services sector for the Asia Pacific region during the global financial crisis. So I took my client-facing skills from working in private banking to working with clients and consulting. After moving to London, I joined Credit Suisse as a project manager in their M&A integration group, where we worked on the integration or segregation, separation of businesses that they were buying or selling. And so having represented my business back at JP Morgan for both the Chase JP Morgan transaction as well as the JP Morgan Bank One transaction, I was able to bring a perspective to my team at Credit Suisse on kind of the actual kind of integration piece that many of my more classically trained project management colleagues didn't have. So again, those are just a couple of personal examples of where I think you can kind of rethink and reapproach how people's skills might fit into a role that you're looking to fill. Last but not least, I just thought I'd spend just final minute on kind of, as I saw it as a participant and as I've seen it as a hiring manager, the benefit and the drawback of returnship programs versus hiring returners directly. So returnships are wonderful. They provide you this amazing on-ramp back into work, oftentimes with extensive training programs, access to senior management, and the amazing support that comes with joining an organization with a cohort of people that are in a very similar position to you. They're typically 10 to 12 weeks in length and kind of designed to be enough time for you to be able to determine yourself as a returner and for the organization to determine whether there's a good fit. So in my opinion, returnships work best when there's a defined, approved, budgeted role for the candidate at the end. Where I feel, again, in my humble opinion, where they work a little less well is where they're viewed as internships. I don't believe most of these candidates need 10 to 12 weeks work experience on their CVs. What they really want and need, and again, I'm generalizing massively here, is to contribute long-term to a role, function in an organization. And then just a point on direct hiring and why we moved to this model at Redington. So formal returnship programs, as you've seen, addressed by Domini, and probably as you've seen in the news, have thousands of applicants for a limited number of openings. They're often kind of only available to larger firms because they can be costly and resource heavy to run. And are kind of limited to certain parts of the industry. So this leaves smaller firms, of which Redington is one, and kind of with limited of it optionality to pursue returnship programs. And we did do a couple. I was one of 5 the first year, which is amazing considering I think it took us to 100 people at the whole firm. But we didn't have the option really to do it at that level every year. We did find at the end of running our returnship program that if we didn't have a really clearly defined role up front, it made it difficult to make sure that this candidate, who 9 times out of 10 proved to themselves that they wanted to be working for us and we wanted them to continue to work for us, that they would have a role. And I myself kind of sort of bounced around the company for a little while until I really found my home in the COO role a couple of years ago. And I think that can be hard for companies. It can be hard for candidates. So for us, really going the direct hire route, working with, in our case, we work with Domini and the Return Hub to really talk to them about the roles that we're looking for, the kinds of skill sets we're seeking to fill those roles with, and then really having a dialogue with them about how we might rethink certain skill sets in the candidates that they're seeing. So, we really do rely on that kind of rethinking and adjacency of skills and as a part of that process. I think that's probably enough from me at the moment. I hope this helped you understand a little bit about kind of a perspective from a returner who's been seeing things from both sides. I do think this can have a meaningful impact on companies' diversity. The large component of these programs, as Domini mentioned, are women. It's clearly also for anyone who's taken a break. But I think this is a really important untapped pool of talent that can make a big impact on firms in many ways. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lee. It's great to hear your story. So I'm aware that we're using up lots of time here, so I'm going to whiz through the next bit, but just to very quickly talk about what other firms are doing in this space to attract diverse talent. We as a business implement a membership structure with our clients, much like Retained Search, but that enables us to work with a firm on any role over the course of an annual membership. Clients can pick up the phone at any time to talk about any particular role they think they would like our help with. And our clients range from, as I said before, very large companies, FTSE 100 companies, to smaller firms with less than 50 people. But where we see success is with working with clients who understand it's not just about a recruitment transaction. It's really important to have an education piece, and through our membership model, that very much facilitates that sort of hand-in-glove partnership. So we very well understand that hiring managers as well need a toolkit to help them understand who are these candidates and how do they assess somebody who's perhaps a bit different to the one that they might usually see who's walking over the road from one of their competitors. And that's not, again, about sort of telling them to sort of forget everything they've learned about an interview process, but just about having a thoughtful approach and understanding what tweaks they might need to make to their existing methods. We run regular lunch and learns, all part of that education piece for a company. But we also understand how important it is for a company to have a platform to market their brand. And that's why we launched our Spotlight Partner page 3 years ago. We get about 400 visits per week to the website, and that's set to grow hugely as we launch our Career Academy. I think the ability for a company to showcase its brand digitally is more important than ever. A usual candidate interview process, obviously a candidate would get to see what a company was like when they walk through the doors of a building and see the people around them, who's there, what does the office look like, very using those kind of visual cues to understand the sort of culture and the environment that they might be working in. And of course, that's not possible right now. And I think, as I said before, the virtual interview is going to stay with us. So really important for brands to be able to tell their story, online. We launched our Spotlight Partner page 3 years ago, and we've now got 20 Spotlight partners. 6 of those have come on in the last month. And I think that's very much due to exactly that reason. Companies want to be able to tell their story online and what's it like to work there. I think just really what I'm talking about today is about targeting senior experienced returners in the same way you would a traditional candidate pool, supporting those hiring managers through a tweaked interview process. An education piece to help organisations with the continual communication around the strategy, and just all really helping to create a change of thinking. That includes dispelling myths about who these candidates are, and embedding a strategic partnership in order to understand from our side what the business needs are, and the culture, and what the business needs to deliver. It's really about the right solutions at the right time. There's clearly no one-size-fits-all approach, certainly when it comes to diversity. Some of our clients might be looking to ring-fence a role once a year. Others want a much broader strategy across many, many roles. But what we do is work together to find out what approach works best for them, and supporting them to achieve the right results. I think the importance of collaboration is not to be overstated. So this is just a formula that I really like, just illustrating a vision for change. And it's all very well knowing that you want to make a change, but knowing what that change is can be really difficult to determine. And this is the classic change equation. So D is obviously for dissatisfaction with the current state. V is a vision of what's possible. F is taking those first steps towards the vision. And R is obviously the resistance that change might be met with. And in order to make a change, there does need to be a significant shift within the organisation to alter this, and a recognition that something is wrong with the way things are done at the moment, and a coherent strategy to address it, together with a plan to alter that resistance. So we're now going to go into our breakout rooms. So the question is, pros and cons. Has your organisation implemented any return to work strategies, and what has worked well and what not so well, and how has this contributed to change? So, okay, so well, listen, thanks so much everyone for sharing your thoughts and your findings and ideas. It's really helpful. As I said, we're going to, we will anonymise those findings and send them out. We just to sort of, I suppose, summarise some of the key findings. What we would say is that returners can be part of an overall recruitment or search strategy. Support the hiring managers with education, help them to understand the value that can be brought from these candidates. I think also really important to share all your positive stories about what's worked well. And obviously sharing about what it's like to work in your organisations, particularly with COVID when there's no shop window, to ensure that you're building awareness of your brand amongst the right talent pools. I think big and small organisations can implement this strategy. It's not just something that is for big companies. And I think in order to really drive the change, it's important to have a vision for what that change could be, recognise what the issues are, and then take the right steps to do that. So if any of your organisations feel that you are missing out on this diverse talent and you need help, wherever you are on that journey, even if it is just at the information gathering stage, please do feel free to get in contact with us and discuss the ways in which we can help. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to the Diversity Project. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you to everyone for attending today's session.